Designers and artists have an amazing ability to manipulate our gaze and attention. They can direct our gaze to specific elements within a picture and even create a movement trajectory. Additionally, they can convey emotions and feelings through their artwork. All these skills are integral components of their craft. Of course, all artists have unique style, visual vocabulary, and creative approach, but at the same time, they also use some common principles and techniques. These techniques allow them to create a certain rhythm within their paintings, distinguish the primary and secondary elements, group elements together, create a sense of scale, convey their intended message, and, of course, achieve visual harmony. This process of finding a harmonious composition is often referred to as harmonization, and the tools and techniques used to achieve it are known as the means of harmonizing a composition. These means are typically listed in pairs, with 7 in total: dimension and rhythm, symmetry and asymmetry, contrast and nuance, commensuration and proportionality, likeness and difference, size and scale, consonance and dissonance. Now, let's take a closer look at each pair, starting with dimension and rhythm. The word dimension has its origin in the Latin dimensio, which means a measuring. In order to quantify the size of objects and distances in our surroundings, we rely on various measuring systems, such as the metric system. The metric system allows us to say that a certain distance contains a certain number of meters. With the metric system, we can quantify distances and express them in meters. Let's say 100 meters. However, dividing a path into meters alone does not assign meaning to them. It only establishes a sense of dimensionality. Rhythm gives this dimensionality a sense of dynamics. The word rhythm comes from the ancient Greek rhythmos, which means flow, strive, or move. We are also familiar with this word because rhythm is an essential part of our lives. Every one of us has a heart that beats in a rhythm, with intervals or pauses between each beat. When we are relaxed, these intervals are longer, but when we feel anxious, the intervals become shorter, and the heartbeat accelerates. The rhythm of our days is organized in a similar way. We sleep at night and take breaks, while during the day, we work or study. If we take frequent breaks and work intensely, we might describe this rhythm as frantic. But how does rhythm manifest in design? Let's explore. And to aid us in this, we can turn to the painting Black Square, a remarkable piece in the suprematism genre. Kazimierz Malevich, the founder of this genre, regarded this painting as the apex of his artistic career. What happens when we add another black square to the one we already have? 2 black squares. At this point, however, there is still no rhythm. But hold on. Let's add a few more black squares at equal intervals from each other. Can you feel it? Now the picture has a sense of a certain sequence and a certain rhythm. To help you sense it better, we're going to use a tool that musicians use to establish rhythm: a metronome. Even without the green cursor, our eyes move along a sequence of elements, perceiving movement. If we increase the intervals, the pace will slow down. If we decrease the intervals, it will speed up. So, one way to demonstrate rhythm is through a series of elements like this. A series consisting of equal elements at equal intervals, like the ones we just showed you, are also known as metrical rhythm. This type of rhythm is often used and can be seen in the windows of high-rise buildings, the lanes of crosswalks, the pages of books, on ancient Greek meanders, and in embroidery patterns. The metrical rhythm enables the harmonious placement of elements within a format while also creating a sense of uniform movement. Now, let's return to our black squares and increase the size of each one by 20% compared to the previous one. Do you feel it? There's a sense of growth, and this is called a growing rhythm. If we reverse the order of the squares, you'll feel a sense of decrease, which is called a descending rhythm. We can convey acceleration or deceleration by changing the intervals between the elements. By perceiving these series, we can create various metaphors. In particular, to represent the volume of sound depending on the position of the slider, to demonstrate the cellular network signal strength, or to show the evolution of humans through time. In art, the use of such a series provides artists with the opportunity to create incredibly dramatic images within a given format. For example, Salvador Dali's painting The Temptation of Saint Anthony depicts the devil's attempts to tempt the founder of hermit monasticism. With all manner of tricks, gifts, and promises, the evil one seeks to break Antony's spirit. He offers the saint fame and fortune. He tries to seduce him in the form of a naked girl. Despite these efforts, Antony remains steadfast in his faith. As you approach the saint in the painting, you'll notice the intervals between the legs of the creatures decrease, conveying a sense of approaching danger. The closer they get to Antony, the more imposing and threatening they become. In contrast, the saint appears small and vulnerable. He dropped to one knee in front of the delusions and stood so static. This interplay between stillness and movement creates a sense of tension and confrontation, a struggle between good and evil. In the painting The Battle of Orsha, which is attributed to Hans Grell, a larger number of participants are depicted in the fight. Thanks to the rhythm, we can feel the motion of the two armies as they move toward each other. Furthermore, the movement of the Polish army from right to left appears more organized, creating a sense of greater effectiveness. The composition is also shifted to the left, which creates a feeling that the army on the right side of the picture is winning. The next pair of means of harmonizing a composition are symmetry and asymmetry. In the previous lecture, we discussed these concepts as types of composition. Then we talked about them as a general organization of composition elements within a format. Now let's focus on symmetry and asymmetry as specific means of harmonizing composition. To begin with, it's worth noting that symmetry can take various forms, even though the general concept entails balanced halves. Specifically, there are three types of symmetry, namely reflection symmetry, rotational symmetry, and translational symmetry. Reflection symmetry is based on an axis that splits an object into two equal and mirror-like halves. The axes of symmetry can be different: horizontal, vertical, diagonal. Some shapes have only one axis of symmetry, such as a triangle, while others have multiple. For instance, a monitor screen has both vertical and horizontal axes, whereas a square has four axes, including vertical, horizontal, and two diagonal. A circle has an infinite number of axes of symmetry. When the two halves are exactly the same, this symmetry is called complete. And when there are slight differences in one half compared to the other, it is referred to as partial symmetry. Rotational symmetry is created by a point located in the center of the composition, around which the elements are balanced. This can be seen in a circle used for playing darts, or a game of roulette, or a target. Finally, translational symmetry involves repeating the axis of symmetry, along with the composition, at regular intervals. This type of symmetry is commonly used in architecture, as well as in patterns that are created using a metric order. Interface designers also frequently use translational symmetry to align icon labels. Symmetry, in its various forms, is a powerful tool for achieving balance and harmony within a composition, whether it be in relation to the whole or to individual elements. Asymmetry, on the other hand, can be used as a tool to convey a specific idea by creating a deliberate imbalance in the composition. Let's revisit the painting The Temptation of Saint Anthony. Notice how the composition leans slightly to the left. Can you feel the pressure of the phantoms on Anthony? Dali creates this effect through the use of asymmetry. The next pair of composition techniques are contrast and nuance, which help us to determine the degree of similarity and difference between the elements of a composition. The term nuance is derived from the French word meaning shade. A nuance is a subtle difference in an element from others that are similar. On the other hand, contrast comes from the Italian word contrastare, meaning to oppose, and refers to a more significant difference. To gain a better understanding of this composition tool pair, let's turn to Malevich's most well-known work. So, we have 5 black squares that are completely identical, lacking both nuance and contrast. But if, say, one of the squares has a rounded corner, this introduces a nuance. In this case, the square's shape remains similar, but with a slight variation that makes it unique. A nuance can also be a subtle difference in shade, or a slightly different size. Essentially, it's a small detail, such as a beauty mark on the cheek of actress Marilyn Monroe. However, if we replace one of the black squares with a red square, this creates a contrast because the difference is substantial. Contrast can be achieved not only through changes in color, but also through variations in shape. For instance, replacing the black square with a triangle would create a contrast in shape. Likewise, if we significantly alter the scale, a scale contrast can be achieved. Contrast is probably one of the fundamental tools for designers and artists. It can be expressed in many ways. For example, Johannes Itten, in his book Design and Form, described the following contrasts: transparent and opaque, smooth and rough, rest and motion, much and little, directional contrast, light and dark, soft and hard, light and heavy. But, of course, everything listed is only a few examples of contrasts. And not all of them are limited to visual elements. Emotional or semantic contrast is often used in art and design as well. The painting portrays a situation that was common in the 19th century, where a young girl is compelled to marry an elderly wealthy man due to her difficult situation. The painting presents several contrasts. In particular, of course, the age difference between the bride and groom and their moods. The groom is depicted with a light but not too emotional smile, reflecting his perception of the marriage as a transaction. On the other hand, the bride's eyes are downcast and red with tears, portraying her shattered fate. The next pair is likeness and difference. The principle here is similar to the previous pair, but in reverse. While one square in the group is different, for example, in color, the other squares are visually perceived as belonging to the same row. Elements that are the same in color, size, or shape form a likeness. This principle is often used in uniforms for civil servants, military personnel, doctors, or the national sports teams, and vice versa. A differently colored uniform for a soccer match referee helps us to easily distinguish them from the players on the field. Artists often use these techniques in their works. One famous example is Leonardo da Vinci's fresco, The Last Supper, in which the main character and center of the composition is Jesus Christ. To emphasize this compositionally, Da Vinci dressed Jesus in the most contrasting clothes, that is, he used color contrast. Also, Jesus sits facing us in an open pose, and his disciples are huddled together on his right and left hand, and all sit half-turned in relation to the teacher. This emphasizes the principle of likeness. And to strengthen his Jesus as the center of the composition, Leonardo places a door with a bright sky behind him, making the outline of Jesus even more expressive. The next pair of harmonizing means are size and scale. When we view an object depicted on a canvas or paper, it may not be immediately clear whether it is large or small in relation to other objects. The outstanding scientist Albert Einstein taught us that everything in the world is relative. So to understand the size of an element, we need to introduce a certain scale into the system. On maps, the scale is often depicted in the form of a ruler, which explains how the map corresponds to the real size of the territory. However, we don't include rulers in paintings. So, how do we convey scale in artworks? Let's look at the example of a cube. If a cube is depicted alone, it's difficult to determine its size. However, if it is placed next to an object whose size we can intuitively feel, the size of the cube becomes clear. For instance, when we see a cube alongside a human figure, we can easily perceive its scale. Now we can clearly see that this cube is huge. And this cube, on the contrary, is tiny because it can fit on the tip of your finger. The next pair of concepts is commensuration and proportionality. To understand it, let's first understand the concept of proportion. It originates from the Latin word proportio, which means I equalize. Proportion is the equality of two ratios. We have an intuitive understanding of proportionality since it is inherent in us by nature. Every person is a carrier of proportion. In the late 15th century, Leonardo da Vinci created one of the most famous schematic depictions of the human body, known as the Vitruvian Man. It was named Vitruvian after the ancient Roman architect Vitruvius, as this diagram served as an illustration for his treatise on architecture. The diagram shows that each part of the human body has a specific proportion. For example, 6 palms make a cubit. 4 cubits, or 24 palms, make a man. The length of the outspread arms equals the height of a man. The length from the tip of the longest to the shortest base of the 4 fingers equals the length of the palm. 4 cubits make a footstep. There are many examples of proportions. For example, many ratios of the Vitruvian Man contain the so-called divine proportion, the golden ratio. The golden ratio is considered one of the most aesthetically pleasing proportions to humans. This proportion is formed when the ratio of the sum of two quantities and the larger quantity is equal to the ratio of the larger and smaller quantities. It is commonly represented by the Greek letter phi, and its value is approximately 1.618. However, the golden ratio is just one of the many possible proportions that exist. It's also possible to establish the proportion of elements in relation to the format. One of the widely used formats is the so-called A4 format, with a size of 210 and 297 millimeters. This ratio itself contains a proportion of 1.4141414114. The name A4 is not accidental. It is derived from the words augmented fourth. Like many other definitions in composition, this proportion also has a musical expression. The commonly used 4, 3, and 16, 9 ratios are also considered proportions. The final pair of harmonization means are consonance and dissonance. These two concepts pertain to how we perceive objects. Consonance refers to a harmonious and comfortable perception of objects. In works dominated by consonance, everything appears calm and balanced. Take, for example, Raphael's Madonna, which exudes a sense of tranquility and harmony. It is this perception that creates consonance. In contrast, dissonance agitates attention. In music, dissonance can be an off-key note or a melody played in reverse. In movies, it can be a peculiar way of speaking lines. And in painting, it can be strange and unsettling images, such as the screaming figure in Edvard Munch's The Scream, or the enigmatic smile of the Mona Lisa in Leonardo da Vinci's painting. Why do artists and designers use dissonance in their works? The answer lies in their desire to capture the viewer's attention and provoke a reaction. After all, in today's world, with an overwhelming amount of information, the competition for attention is intense. That's why we often encounter dissonance in various forms. It can manifest as pop-up ads or casino ads on websites, flashy headlines, or even poster designs in the brutalist style. A dissonance may seem strange or irritating, but do you agree that it has the power to grab our attention, even if only for a brief moment? In the upcoming lecture of the composition series, we'll delve into Gestalt psychology and learn more about the nuances of human perception.